During an interview on NBC News this week, NBC News correspondent Garrett Hawk actually had the opportunity to ask Lara Trump, Trump's daughter-in-law, and of course the co-chair of the Republican National Committee. He asked her two very good questions. The first one, of course, is, you pretty much got your job because of your last name, didn't you? And then the second follow-up question to that was essentially, why should anybody trust you to hold this position? And Lara Trump's responses to both of those questions were absolutely insane. Here's how that exchange went down. Garrett Hawk asks, I hope you won't be offended by the premise of this question, but the position of RNC co-chair is not one that traditionally gets this kind of attention. A lot of it is because of who you are as Donald Trump's daughter-in-law. You have Donald Trump's last name. What do you say to Republican voters? And there are millions of them, people who voted for Nikki Haley, Republicans who are not comfortable with the idea of the Trump family takeover of the Republican Party. And Lara Trump responded and said, well, I'm not the first family member to have ever held this title, first and foremost, of any president or former president. Hawk goes, well, that's right. So Trump continues. She goes, and so this is not a first in history. But what I will say is I have had so much experience. If you look at the fact that I am one of very few people who can say that I have been a part of now 3 presidential campaigns, the media exposure and experience that we in the Trump family have had over the past 8 years rivals most people who make their career in politics, and I can guarantee you none of us ever imagined we would find ourselves in this position. So, all right. Like, hey, you got your position because of your last name. And she's like, hey, other people have done it. And of course, the follow-up to that is like, well, why should Republicans trust you? She's like, because I've had media attention for 8 years. Duh. I've had media attention for 20 years. Does that make me qualified to run the DNC? I mean, let's be honest here. I probably could do a better job than, the leadership they've had for the last, 10, 15 years. But either way, no, it does not. That's not a credential. Like, I've been on TV plenty of times. Wonderful. That does not make you qualified to run a national political party. Well, I worked on 3 presidential campaigns. Okay, let's talk about those 3 campaigns. Those 3 campaigns were all for the same guy. So really, you worked on 1 campaign. And you didn't even really hold a position where you had to do anything, okay? So you didn't even actually work. You were just there. And if we want to judge you by your success or failure in those campaigns, how did those campaigns turn out? Well, in 2016, he lost the popular vote by more than 3 million votes. So he technically couldn't even convince most Americans to vote for him. So I would kind of count that as a failure. He was, of course, saved by the Electoral College, but that's really not what you want. You want to be able to have a solid victory, and you don't have that. 2020, of course, he got his ass kicked by President Biden and spent the last 3.5 years whining about it, pretending that it didn't actually happen. So that is a huge blemish on your record. And then, of course, this current campaign, you really want to brag about that? Trump's campaign is virtually bankrupt. He doesn't even have any rallies on the schedule because he can't afford them. And you want Republicans to trust you based on that? If we are looking at this based solely on your resume, you shouldn't have a job. You should be unemployable, not just at the RNC, but just as a human being. You have no relevant work experience. You have no relevant life experience. You are in over your head, and your idiotic answers to these questions give us absolute proof that you don't know what you're doing.